project that was supposed to be, coming out soon. And others are who have been, like, I heard article or someone was saying that the day he was coming to the Oscar, he got a script for a new movie, a new project, and now they are pulling it back. So, this by in itself is having an impact. And like I said, he has been a smart guy after since he left the Fresh Prince of Bel Air, and managed everything, managed, the PR, the money, the whole thing. And why would he take such a risk and damage his reputation, his income, and other things? So to me,
Because
it
he's
doesn't really.
impenetrable. Yeah, because he's reached a certain status, which is that narcissistic status in Hollywood, where he's the people's choice. For me, put it in the right way, and it was all theatrics. He thought he could get away with it and stuff, and he's seeing the backlash, and I think he deserves it because he's. I mean, I followed him for a long time. I liked him when he was Fresh Prince, but Will Smith's a dick, really, especially after what he did to the first Aunt Viv. I'm done.
Yeah, me
It's not
too.
like
He
Yeah,
it's
used to
not
yeah.
like
be.
He's
Scientology.
very,
It
yeah.
lets
He's
you
all about
touch stuff.
himself. Yeah, he's very self.
Who's
It's
mentioning?
all about him.
Hold on, David. Is that you talking about Scientology?
Yeah, like didn't I just say he went Tom Cruise? The
Will Smith
people
is Scientology as
There's
well.
are
some,
too
there
hot.
is some, there is. That's why when this first reared its head, when this first occurred, you heard me say, is anyone intimately familiar with Scientology? Because I have had a few friends who were Scientologists, and from what I understand, because I didn't go to the meetings, I didn't go beyond the
You
little
cannot leave them.
right. The but having had friends who have gone through it for rather extensively, um, the there is an element of um, owning your
Self-sacred.
owning your emotions and responding in a what they feel would be what they would define as a kind of a staying true to yourself, truthful to your emotional impulses, and so there's an element that enables Tom and Will potentially to react in a way that your average cat might not. And so I think we can potentially, I don't, I have nothing against Scientology really, but there's potentially, it could help explain why somebody would do something that the rest of us would not. Anyway, but
I think
having
it's
said that,
entitlement. The key
Doesn't
word you're
doesn't
looking
make
for is
sense.
entitlement.
well, but
Yeah.
you know what I love, Dell? You brought up a point that I didn't hear anyone else bring up, which is that same exact scenario, same people involved, same words involved, at a in the middle of nowhere, like in the desert, right? Like they bump into each other on a street corner.
That's on site, Tyler.
Yeah, in the middle of Poughkeepsie, at 2 in the morning, he wouldn't have done the same thing. I think you're exactly right. I don't think he would have responded the same way. That
Yeah,
he
anybody that's from the East Coast, from up north, and has ever been in certain situations, we know the types like Will Smith, and they respond differently in different situations, and they respond differently to different people. Because I'm pretty sure if The Rock gave that joke, he wouldn't have ran up there with all that energy. So yeah,
I found a
I
crazy
agree.
video. I got to play
Hear
this.
this too, because you're my nephew.
Watch
So a
this.
dude screamed to me the other night, "Hey, Will, I want to be an actor, man. I want to be an actor just like you." You know, usually people say stuff to me like that. I'm like, "Yeah, man. You know, you can do is give them an encouraging word." But I was just sitting here thinking, and it dawned on me: 99% of people that say stuff like that are not willing to do what it takes to make their dreams come true. The Marines have a saying: everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die. And that's just real. At the center of bringing any dream into fruition is self-discipline. Something as simple as food and eating. It's not about your body as much as it is about your mind. It's getting command of your mind to be able to choose actions that are in your own best interest. Every day we are choosing shit that's not in our own best interest. Right? So if the world is attacking you and the world wants to fight you and the world's trying to hold you down, so you're going to kick yourself in the balls? So you're going to stop yourself from getting what you dream. Self-discipline is the center of all material success. You cannot win the war against the world if you can't win the war against your own mind.
That's some dude named,
Yeah.
Oh, I
named,
laughed so hard. It was so funny.
named Will Smith saying that it's all about when the world comes to attack you, you have to have the self discipline to not kick yourself in the balls. Those were his own words.
How did it work out for him?
Wow.
The
Yeah,
thing
that's
is, it's
why
okay for you to, yeah, you don't have to drink your own
theatrical.
Kool-Aid. You just got to sell it.
Yeah.
Prosperity gospel
Isn't that
on
what they say? Do what
the
do
Scientological
sorry.
level.
They say that, do what I say, not what I do, I guess.
Oh, yeah, that's what the parents do. That's what my dad used to say. Do as I say, not as I do.
Exactly.
Okay, no more.
And
I agree.
I will
I
be
agree with
very
whoever said had it been The Rock instead of Kid Rock, Chris Rock, he wouldn't have defended his woman.
Yeah, he wouldn't have ran up there so urgently, but most believe he probably wouldn't have responded to Chris Rock the same way if they were on the streets. And
And I hear rumors that next year's host is Mike Tyson, so maybe that won't happen anymore.
someone's going
You
to
know,
bite an ear off. I can
They
oh,
should
sense
have
it right
they
now.
should have Chris Rock do it again next year and have him bring out Mike Tyson just for the opening monologues, like just standing. That would be just standing there, just like off the side, deadpan. You know,
And do the
Probably
same
gonna sell
exact
the street
joke.
now.
yes, and do the thing, and then we'll have him call out Jada. Yeah. Oh my god.
yeah. It's
Oh my
so
god.
sad. It's so sad how this conversation is going and going, but also, in some circles, they have been saying, for example, what happens if it was Chris was a white person that would have been in jail. They said that, when Chris said, no, no, I don't
No,
want
don't
him.
go there, Messi.
No,
Yeah,
I'm just
it
saying.
came down to how about a white and
No,
yellow
no,
person? How about a
but I'm
brown
just
person?
saying, that conversation was brought up. I saw those things, and even somebody is saying, for example, also bringing into the stereotype of this type of things right into the globe, right on everybody's TV room to millions, and even people jumped in. I heard what 56% rising after that incident that everybody joined to just see. So that was for me the sad part also that brought me into that conversation. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I
But
agree
there's
with
one
you.
other thing that's being missed. I mean, Demi Moore with that short hair, I thought she was beautiful. And Jada looks beautiful even though she didn't have any hair. And so it's like it's somehow it's like getting across here. Like Chris Rock didn't say Demi Moore was ugly and Jada, now you're ugly. He's just saying see you in the next version of that movie, whatever it was called. But there was
G.I.
no
Jane.
qualification. Yeah, there was no qualification as to
so,
she was ugly. I thought they were both beautiful.
I think
well,
I think
I'll
the
put it
all.
real
I
fast
just
for
want
y'all
to
in
say something.
context. Y'all can get back to tech news. So Chris Rock, and
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure Sharon knows, seen that documentary called Black Hair. So I think it's probably simply for that because I'm not a huge Chris Rock fan, but he most definitely goes in on women of color and about their hair activities, which it actually goes back to slavery and apartheid, and it's like the degradation of culture and all this other stuff. So it has a bunch of other stuff, but in the context in which Chris Rock did it, where it was like a joke, and he's a comedian and he is up there, and they have laughed at others and stuff. He wasn't calling her ugly. He was just referencing like GI Jane or whatever, and it wasn't done in you know
The
a
the
roasting
only
manner, but it was just is what it is. So, it
Yeah,
has some
John's
other
wants so
stuff
I want
to
to
it.
say something.
yeah, the
John.
only thing that saved Chris Will Smith to go to jail is Chris Rock reaction and how amazing it was because he will be in jail or arrested.
Technically true. Technically
Yes.
true.
Yeah, Very tell true. But
It's
the
anger
director
management.
too. Yeah.
No, but I
Eh,
think the police, the
News, tech
academy
news.
came out. The
Yeah, Dr.
academy
Frank
came
can't
out.
stand it anymore. Let's move on.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. I came here for the tech
Yeah,
news, so I'm
they're
glad we're not
yeah,
talking about
starting
Tyler, you
Ukraine.
to.
you can tie it into tech because they all had cell phones in their pocket.
Okay.
Hey, but I want to bring up one thing, Tyler. Do you know that today there's an article from Malaysia Airlines that a Boeing 737-800 nosedived? It's
No.
7,000 feet, but luckily the pilot managed to stabilize it and return to KL airport.
Holy shit.
Is that
So
the
it
new?
is the
Is that?
same.
Are
It is
those the new
exactly the
planes?
same model as the one in China that
China.
crashed 2 weeks
Oh my
ago.
god.
That's right. I
Are
heard of
those the
that.
new ones that they came out with that
No,
are
no,
supposed to
it's not
replace
the
them?
it's not the 737 Max, but it's 737-800. But I suspect it could be a similar software issue. What do you think?
Right.
Sounds
It's
But
like
not,
an
in
opportunity
China's
for
report,
Elon.
but in China's right now, the hottest suspicion of this crash is it's a suicide uh, pilot
Nah.
by
I read that
the
too.
vice pilot.
no,
That's
here,
how they
hold on.
reported. So
Maybe, well,
No,
I
it's
can
all
under,
on the table for the China crash still, because it did level off for a period of time before, like a
oh,
short
great
period of
point.
time.
That's right. It
Yeah.
did mid dive. It turned around and even went up for
Yeah.
a brief minute. So that would rule out the suicide thing, unless somebody would argue, oh, that's the
Something
co-pilot
heavy.
fighting for the yoke of the
Yeah.
plane or something.
Yeah.
So,
He
hold on,
tweeted.
Cheryl. I want to read Cheryl's headline. This is
No, Tyler,
uh,
your mic. Check your mic.
I
It's a
didn't
bit
do any.
buggy.
Okay, hold on. But to Cheryl's point, this article's out right now. It's about 10 hours old. This is kind of semi breaking news. My mic input is the same that it's always been.
That's better now.
One, two, three. Okay. So it says Malaysia Airlines 737, 7,000 feet drop in seconds. So that's a dive. That's a very, Ben has the most flight time of anybody. Did he bail out already? He was just here. Let's ping Ben back in on this one. Maybe if we each do
Yeah, I'll try.
Yeah, tell them it's a safe space now. We're not talking about it anymore.
okay, pinging Ben. Okay, so Malaysia Airlines Boeing flight took a sudden dive. Passengers floated in their seats. Is the headline? Yeah, that's what happens when you dive straight down. And the flight path of this thing, it's kind of took off from Malaysia, went out to sea, turned around, came back. Thank God. Flight took a sharp dive 30 minutes after takeoff. Based on passenger checks of the flight radar application, the flight was cruising at 31,000 feet before dropping to 24,000 feet in a matter of seconds. However, can you imagine how scary, if you knew anything about the Chinese flight that happened recently, right? What percent of people on this flight are familiar with the Chinese flight that just happened, right?
100%.
Probably 80, 90%, right? Now, imagine you're on this flight, you're cruising 31,000 feet, that's like cruising altitude, and the thing goes straight vertically down. The thought going through your mind is, we're done, we're dead. This is as sure a bet as it gets. A plane going into straight
Even if
vertical.
I didn't know about the China flight, I think I'd be thinking that with that kind of
Right.
a drop.
But especially if you knew about the China one, wow. I just can't imagine the degree of horror going. How many of these people died of heart? Did nobody die of a heart attack? I can easily imagine people dying of heart attacks in that scenario.
Yeah, I think the next 24 hours will be crucial.
She also said some passengers were screaming and crying, feared for their lives. Fuck yeah, they were. Who wouldn't be doing that?
much of them will probably need sedation afterwards.
She added that the flight made a U-turn, circles above Malacca a few times, and returned to Kuala Lumpur Airport. Oh my god! I get riled up just thinking about that. That's crazy.
Well, kudos to the pilot and the co-pilot. That is no easy thing to pull out of something like that successfully, I think.
Well, I
7:30.
think
So
this is a
is
great
this like a
opportunity.
I'm going to tell you
Sorry, go
something.
ahead.
I'm stating right now here for fact, for sure. I'm not flying any 737-800s. Straight up, or straight down, or whatever, or anyways. I'm just ain't going to
well,
happen. No,
well,
thank
I
you.
think
So I think Elon recently beat out Boeing for the NASA contract. I think this gives him another opportunity, perhaps, to enter the domestic and international airplane market, because I personally would trust his plane more than Boeing, given kind of their reputation, how it's going down the sink now. So it's definitely something to be concerned about. And the main thing that I've heard in terms of like watching the documentary of Boeing and everything, it's that the engineers who were once the executives running the company, now you have mostly MBAs and business type people running the company rather than engineers. So there's not really an appreciation for the complexity of the magic of flight. So I think that's also something to consider, that cutting
So
corners or being too certain of yourself when you're not necessarily qualified to make that sort of assessment.
I
so
think two things that has been mentioned after the crash of the Ethiopian Airlines was that Boeing, one is the corruption or whatever you name it with the Congress approvals, so that they don't seem to hold them. They usually have their own Boeing people being part of even the approval process, the certification process, so that like when the MAX happened, that there were actual reports from some of the Boeing employees about some faults and some tests that they have seen. But even with that, the regulatory body did pass it and got the certification. So that shows you how much corruption and colluding that was happening. The second one is the competition with Airbus, right? So in order to pass for that, even probably with the regulatory bodies, they look the other way because they want them to win that competition, and they want to cut corners as well as time, because sometimes when they make in the Boeing changes, it needs time and testing simulations and other things that other qualified people know. But those are the two main reasons that Boeing is having trouble nowadays, that has been mentioned by the aviation people.
And just keep in mind that Elon is now worth 300 billion, so it's not inconceivable that he could buy his way into fixing this problem at Boeing. So that would be kind of a funny move as well.
okay, so that was a little departure there. They've now taken to Twitter. Somebody was on Twitter and said, it's just this is just a person who I don't know if they were on the flight or whatever. They have a name that seems to be Malaysian, and they say that luckily nothing happened, and luckily passengers on board made it back to the airport. And we hope that the airline could explain further on the incident, blah, blah, blah. And then the airline, Malaysia Airlines, replies to this person and says, hello, we apologize for the inconvenience caused. Please be advised that the Malaysian airline, I mean, maybe the person who wrote that isn't fluent in English, but that ain't exactly the right uh, type of apology for that type of a scenario. You don't scare people, to shit themselves, literally, screaming for their lives, and then say, we apologize for the inconvenience caused. No, it's a little more than an inconvenience. You nearly killed people with heart heart attacks. That's more than an inconvenience. Anyway,
Yeah, I think the social media admin person is probably not well trained enough. By the way, US NTSB has arrived in China to assist China on the investigation of the crash flight data recorder review.
The black box has already sent to the U.S., but no.
I think they applied for some visas for the American to go into China to investigate,
Yeah,
apparently.
but in the news here said the black box has already sent to
Oh,
the
yeah, that's
yeah.
great.
Yeah, it's
Can have
strange.
some
It's
visibility.
very uh unusual that they didn't detain the black box to themselves. So that's why we here notice this news.
okay, before we get into oh, hang on. Jada Smith wishes Will Smith didn't slap Chris Rock at the Oscars. She didn't need protecting. She's not a wallflower.
I
That's
didn't want to extend the conversation. That's why I didn't share it. You're
okay.
doing it again, Tyler.
Sorry. She wishes he didn't. There we go. And now she's throwing him under the bus.
Yes.
Yes,
As well as her
He's
son, by the way, as well as her son.
yes.
And
It
he's
then, of
not
course,
affects her.
standing
It
by. Now
affects her
now you
bank account.
yeah,
yeah,
now I understand
of
why
course,
Al
now
says
she's
he's
paying the consequence. You're exactly right. She's like they're both being blacklisted out of Hollywood. It appears. So, by the way, the first comment on this article is a dinger. The first comment is, "Put my wife's name back in your fucking mouth."
Was I allowed? I'm sorry.
Oh, Trevor Noah also said those things at the Grammys, right? Yeah. Oh, by the way, the whole consequence of also this whole episode is Chris becoming really like being taking the high road and just moving along, not pressing charges or even not reacting or doing anything. I mean, he's doing amazing. His shows
Messy.
are overselling, the prices are going up, and I heard he's being overbooked everywhere.
And
Everybody
the title of
wanna.
this
And
show is Ego Death. Just saying.
but But Messi, remember that Chris also mentioned years ago the worst insult a man could receive is a smack in the face. So given that that's his internal thoughts, I give him 100% accolades for taking the high road and doing the harder thing. The only thing I'll add to this conversation is this: there's a lot of speculations about what's going on. I'll say this about Will Smith: he's always had a temper problem. I think it's rooted in his insecurities about himself, uh, given that he's not a true actor, right? And there's always been some hush words in the backgrounds around him. He's done nothing but have coaches. He's not a professional actor. Denzel has tried to help him along that score. Adding to that, his personal issues that have been coming to the fore, and also the brunt end of of fodder. We're seeing the polished guy. He's having to contend with Hollywood, what Hollywood believes of him and his abilities. And what we saw that day was a culmination of his own personal feelings, which is further less respected by me.
Okay, shifting to
Shall we move
Ukraine.
on?
Is
Yes.
a U.S. General Mark Milley said the West should brace for a very protracted conflict in Ukraine, saying that Russia's war in Ukraine could last for years. That's the
I
headline.
agree.
Yeah, that's actually the the general. I forgot his name, Dempsey or something. I think he did testify. I think in Congress or had a report on the weekend saying that this it looks like more of the war is going to be measured not by like a month or weeks. It's going to be in years. He said it. So the Biden administration, I think officials in the security that said it officially about that.
I'm
Okay.
also looking at the strategies that Putin's been utilizing from the start. People were saying that he's crazy, but no, he's actually been very strategic, sort of going into war, dumping Ukrainians onto the global economic responsibility was very strategic, looking chaotic, but then striking Mariupol and then also encircling other borders was strategic. The idea that he understands his resources are things we're not going in there to take, we will pay for no matter what, is very strategic. His understanding that these sanctions are not going to be impactful, not in the ways that we've been discussing, is also strategic. He's been in this for the long haul. He's identified his players. I've said this last year. There have been lines that were drawn way back in September, and there are countries that are quietly supporting him. This is not going to end very soon, and we do not know who the winner will be at the end of this.
Sharon, I agree with everything you said. I've been saying he's like a magician, right? The game is placed elsewhere. Everybody's sorry, I'm in the gym, so I'm out of breath. But he's like everybody's. Wow, look, he can't attack Kyiv. He circled Kyiv, and his goal hasn't been Kyiv. It's been Odessa all along, you know. And he's making inroads there. And also the whole thing about his putting now selling his commodities in Russian rubles. He's saying, "Hey, I refuse to take your paper for real stuff." That's what people don't understand. Is like we've had this charade of selling paper for real stuff, and he's saying no more. And because he's got real stuff and all we have is paper, it's like saying the king has no clothes. And so now the house of cards starts to fall apart, and he's known this. And first of all, I don't agree with his attacking Ukraine. But I am also, like you, Sharon, looking and saying what he's done. It's been strategic, and I don't know. I think he's going to, and I don't think the sanctions are going to work. He's got a market of 3 billion people who are not sanctioning him between all the BRIC countries. And he's got the energy. He's the largest exporter of energy, and China's the largest importer of energy. I mean, put two and two together.
Okay, a couple other
And
articles.
China's been preparing. They're hoarding on corn. They're hoarding on things that can sort of propel fuel. They are preparing as well. If we're not paying attention to what they're purchasing in terms of resources and what they're investing in terms of infrastructure, and they've been doing this for the past 2 years, this is extremely strategic and planned out. The only losers I see in this is Americans if we enter the war, to be honest.
Yeah, everybody should. Well, I don't give financial advice, but I am actually looking at commodities and things like potash, and which are key ingredients for fertilizers and all those things. Because the thing about commodities is they stay flat for a long time, but when they go up in like 2 years, they go up dramatically. And I think all this just expedited that cycle too.
I want to read a couple headlines from the past since we met last time, 24 hours ago. A new one from 5 hours ago from Radio Free Europe says that Kazakhstan says it does not recognize the separatist territories in eastern Ukraine as independent. And for those who don't know, Kazakhstan is basically between Russia and China. It's the people there speak Russian. A former USSR state is the point here is that Kazakhstan is not taking Russia's side in this. That's the interesting bit, and this is one of Russia's neighbors. So Kazakhstan is kind of being pro-Ukraine, and Ted Cruz went on Fox News and said that Joe Biden started the war in Ukraine, which American politics being American politics, the Republicans are going to have to try and pin this whole mess on Joe Biden for the next election season, and they're going to try and come up with some very crafty ways to try and pin this whole mess on Joe Biden and all of the second and third order effects of this mess on Joe Biden, like rising fuel prices. This is going to be Joe Biden's doing. That he made this war happen. He's responsible for your increased energy bills and food shortages and everything, every bad thing in the world. Rather than blame it on anyone, they of course they want to pin it on their main political opponent, who's Joe Biden. So that makes all the perfect sense in the world on the face of it that they would do that. Anyway, he's getting a lot of backlash for that because people on the left are not going to take that. They're going to challenge
But
his.
Tyler,
Yes.
to be fair on the side, like I mean, when Biden came in, like with the 50 years of experience in the diplomatic circles, I mean, the one thing was expected that he would be dealing, global things in a more diplomatic way, and then building up bridges and approaching things the way they are in a very different manner. I mean, he's the best person and with the best experience to actually kind of you know, tone down all those kind of scenarios. But in reality, I mean, I think the overall, the situation, not just on the geopolitical side, but geoeconomic side, I mean, it kind of like flared up left, right, and center pretty much everywhere. I mean, look at the Middle East, look at the Europe and Russia. I mean, South China Sea by itself was a, thing to unfold. but now the whole thing is just getting out of hand pretty much all over the world. I
Hmm.
mean, for the very first time, like UAE and Saudi, who would just like bow down to anything, refuse to take the phone calls. So one thing I fail to understand that, I mean, the person who's more capable enough and has got the most experience in pretty much the whole of US, um, on the diplomatic side, served as a vice president on the, Foreign Affairs Committee, the longest term time. I mean, how could he not see things and, solve these things? Um, so it's kind of fair to actually just argue that he hasn't handled things properly.
Hmm. So Japan is now saying out loud that they are condemning Russia for war crimes, and that's that they have a bit of ocean between them. But Japan is also not far off from Russia. In fact, they have disputed islands between them. They're quite close indeed. So again, another kind of neighbor of Russia's being not taking their side. The Netherlands has seized 14 yachts as Russia faces more sanctions, and I think that's the interesting ones that I've seen since we met last time. Anyone else have one since we met last time? Okay, well then we will get into the commanders order Russian soldiers to shoot civilians in Ukraine. The Intercept is reporting 6 hours ago that Russian commanders ordered Russian soldiers to shoot civilians. And I guess if they can prove that, things are going to get real. Okay, so now we get into the regular tech news as we do. Cheryl, if you're ready for that, we can do that.
Tyler,
The yeah.
shortest thing. Did you bring up the guys I sent you on DM on Twitter?
I have it right here. Thank you. So Johan has a Ukraine-related story here that he DM'd me. It's from a Twitter account called Ukraine Weapons Tracker. It shows a video, a 1 minute 43-second video of footage of a UAT 64BV tank engaging a Russian convoy, destroying a BTR 82A from an ambush position. What did you want to say about this one?
The thing is here that they are actually doing an ambush of this column of vehicles coming, and what they do is they have their tank standing in a house that has collapsed. If they collapsed it with the tank or not, that's unknown. But they standing so the vehicle is not visible from the road, and they have a very, very narrow vector where they actually could fire. It's actually less than 3 degrees of panning they can do with the turret. And so the Russians can't see the tank, and when they can see the tank, they get a hole in their own vehicle, because they have actually positioned them so specifically that the Russians will be shot from the rear, from the back, more or less, of the vehicles that are passing them by, and that's a weak point of all armored vehicles in every case. So they have a brilliant position for this tank, the Ukrainian tank. And if you look at the clip, you will see that the Russians have absolutely no idea where the enemy fire came from. So if you look a bit into you can see the tracers from the autocannons as well as the machine guns, where they spray all the buildings in the general direction of where the shot that killed their friends came from. And this proves how delicate and how smart they are. And then the guys in the tank, they are actually shooting, as we can see in the film, they are actually shooting 6 shots. They only hit one of them dead on the target, but they are calmly in the vehicle because they know that we are safe here. They can't hit us with rockets. They can't shoot at us directly unless they are in this vector just in front of us. This is military precision work at its absolute best. It's really viewable, and they have done it as easy as possible for non-war geeks to actually see which vehicles are from which country, etc. That was a long one. You want done?
Yeah, the video editing is quite nice as well. So, shifting from Ukraine into tech, as we do, and as tradition requires, we have to do the air horn first. So, happy Wednesday, April 6th, everybody. Here's the top stories for today. The first is, it says, from Casey Newton, who's a tech blogger. Casey says, with Elon Musk on Twitter's board, Twitter CEO Parag Agrawal may struggle to balance his own vision against that of an unpredictable board member with a much louder megaphone.
Overpowered.
Yes, task number one, undermine CEO, consolidate power. Today, let's talk about what Elon Musk means for the future of Twitter. Are there any new tweets? Not really. Okay. Number two, from Bloomberg, Elon Musk refiles the SEC disclosure. Oh, that's just a technicality. Who cares? Number three, Twitter says it has been working on an edit tweet option since last year and will start testing this feature in Twitter Blue Labs in coming months. Number four, Sky Mavis, which runs Axie Infinity, raises $150 million led by Binance, with participation from Animoca, Andreessen Horowitz, and others to reimburse users after the Ronin exploit. The hackers behind the Ronin network breach have so far moved $32 million of the $600 million of stolen funds, highlighting how the blockchain's ledger makes laundering harder. Number five, Binance US, the exchange's American affiliate, raises $200 million seed financing at a $4.5 billion pre-money valuation. Number six, from BuzzFeed, investigation reveals WorldCoin, which collects iris scans in exchange for free crypto, is wrestling with issues from angry field operators to privacy concerns. And that is, what's his name? Who was running that one? Gosh, dang it! The smart dude who was running Y Combinator, Sam Altman, and yeah, that's an interesting project where they're doing an iris scan, and if you do the iris scan, then they give you some of this coin called WorldCoin. Weird, interesting one. Anyway, the next one is from Bloomberg. I guess it's number seven, MicroStrategy. That's Michael Saylor, who's probably the biggest Bitcoin maxi bull of them all. Uses a loan against its Bitcoin holdings to buy $190 million more Bitcoin. A first for the company. MicroStrategy now owns about $6 billion worth of Bitcoin. Number eight, Fast Company interview with Tim Sweeney, the CEO of Epic Games, and Epic executives on Unreal Engine 5's launch as its new graphic rendering tech, using it in building the metaverse and more. And that's an interesting point, which is Epic, and this Unreal Engine was traditionally used for making video games, and now it's kind of ideally suited as kind of one of the two main platforms for building the metaverse, because the metaverse is sort of an extension of the most recent games and etc. Anyway, they're in a really nice
Yeah,
position.
lots of momentum, lots of developers, really easy to use software, very dynamic. Everything from I think enterprise to Hollywood to the video gaming industry. So if you learn the tool set, it translates really well across all those industries as well. So I think not only an engine for the metaverse, but also an engine for the economy as people, more folks stay at home. They could pick up this tool set and learn how to use it and make some change on the side.
From the Wall Street Journal, a company or a tech startup called Edo, which is the kind of the Japanese, think of that as like a capital, the old Japanese capital.
No, it's the ancient name of Tokyo.
Yeah, it's how still it's I'm trying to think of how to frame it in the right cultural context. Yeah, it's like ancient Tokyo. So, um, which when you say Edo, you instinctively think of it as like the capital of Japan. That kind of goes hand in hand with the word. Anyway, the the company is an ad measurement service for TV and perhaps more importantly streaming platforms. So they're able to measure ads on things like Netflix. And interestingly, it's co-founded by actor Ed Norton and just raised $80 million. And it wants to compete with Nielsen by helping advertisers see whether consumers take action after seeing a commercial. The next is from the Washington Post that the Center for Countering Digital Hate did a study of 8,717 direct messages sent to 5 high-profile women shows that Instagram didn't act on 90% of reported abusive direct messages. Women on Instagram are exposed to epidemic of misogynist abuse, according to a new report. Okay. Taylor Lorenz, I think, is the author of that, and she tweets saying that women on Instagram are being exposed to an epidemic of misogynist abuse, according to a new report. And when women are met with an unrelenting barrage of online hate in intimate spaces, such as direct messages, it results in a chilling effect on free speech. Women describe fearing for their safety in speaking out and how fearful and isolated online violence made them feel. The next is from Kevin Marks. He says Twitter changed how embeds work for deleted tweets, causing blank spaces on website. Twitter says it is to better respect when users deleted their tweets. Okay. Yeah, what to do about a deleted tweet that somebody has embedded in a website. Um, the next is from Reuters. It says Intel, the chip company, is suspending all business operations in Russia and says it has implemented business continuity measures to minimize disruption to its global operations. Next is from Google itself. Its AI blog, Google AI claims PALM, its 540B parameter dense decoder only transformer model shows breakthrough capabilities in tasks like language, reasoning, and coding. And I have no idea, that's gobbledygook to me, but I imagine they're trying to hype their own. It sounds like a processor. Does anyone know what the 540B is? A
I think
decoder?
it's 540 billion parameter.
Yes, 540 billion parameter dense decoder only transformer model. Pathways language model, PALM, scaling to 540 billion parameters for breakthrough performance. Okay, so they're training a 540 billion parameter language model, which they internally call PALM, PALM, and
So to get
great.
some idea of that, Tyler, the GPT-3 was 100 and something billion parameters, and it's pretty capable. We've all seen things written by GPT-3. So this is significantly larger than that. The other thing is to what do they mean by parameters? So one massively oversimplified way of looking at it would be that if you had a two parameter model, you could be asking a machine so you could be asking Excel to extrapolate a line for you. You could have a bunch of dots on a chart, and you could be, for instance, saying what's the straight line through these dots if they indeed make a straight line. Or a bunch of other kind of tasks like that segment and recognize and so forth. But that's two-dimensional. So when they say 500 billion parameters, one oversimplified way of looking at it is you're basically saying there's 500 billion dimensions to this problem. These dots aren't in 2 dimensions, X and Y. They're not in 3 dimensions in the space we're used to. They're not even in 4 dimensions, X, Y, Z, and maybe something else like time, but they're in 500 billion different dimensions. Now you go ahead, Mr. AI, and work out what the patterns are in that 500 billion dimensional space, if you like. Just wanted to give that flavor to what it means to be a 500 billion parameter model. That's not a strict mapping, and that does depend on exactly what type of network it is. This is a transformer, so it's a bit of a loose mapping, but it's that kind of thing, just to give the average listener an idea as to what it means to be 500 billion. It's as if the AI is thinking in something like thinking in 500 billion dimensional space.
All right, thank you for that. Ben, while you're back, Cheryl shared the article that came out about 10 hours ago of a Malaysian Airlines flight that took a 737-800, which went into a nosedive from 31,000 feet about 30 minutes after takeoff. Went from 31,000 to 24,000 in seconds. Somehow the pilot managed to save everything and return back to the airport. But this is another example right after the recent China Air example where that one tragically went into the ground. Any comment on this?
Well, crucial question first is, was it a max?
No.
So
800,
not a max.
737
So it
800.
didn't have this.
But but
So it didn't have this new.
but 737, yeah, 737-800 was the one that was crashed in China too. So it's the same model, not the Max, but 800.
But does it have the MCAS system or not? That
Yeah,
I
they're
would.
suspecting.
Yes, that would be the crucial question. I have since watched that documentary on how all that works, and obviously, having been a
Yes.
pilot, I have some idea of it. I mean, it's disgusting that they put a system on a plane that's so critical and didn't tell the pilots for commercial reasons. That was the story of the MCAS problems with the Max.
Mm.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on here clearly. I mean, the only real way to know is to look at the wait, and obviously nobody in the world of news wants to wait until the NTSB report, the National Transportation Safety Board, or whatever, whoever's overseeing this is report. That's the way to really know what happens in an aircraft crash. They really do pick the bones out of things, and they really do learn lessons and make systemic changes across the industry. But it takes years, and by then it's no fun anymore. I don't really have an early response to that. It kind of, whether it's anything to do with this system that was on the Maxes or not would be the first question. Does it have this MCAS system, or even anything reminiscent of it? Could it be anything to do with that? I don't know. You really need the data to make any indication here. I mean, the simplest explanation is the pilot pushed the stick forward hard, or but why would he do that? So was it an aircraft problem? Was it a human problem? It just, without the data, without the cockpit voice recordings, without the flight recorder, you don't know. And I'm sure that's being looked at, but that's the way to approach it with the aircraft thing. Until you've got some actual data in hand, you really know. There's so many. There's an infinite number of possible explanations from what I know of it, which is almost nothing.
But but just a question. Plane crashes are supposed to be, at least just despite lately what's happening, rare occurrence. And then when these two similar, even though one crashed and one was saved, these two exact same planes having the same kind of thing, that's a coincidence, you think?
Well, as I always say with coincidence, can lead to B in an environment of C, and causality is only one of those 17. And once we become hyper alert to these things, we start looking for everything. I mean, how many times has a plane lost a significant amount of height in a short amount of time due to a microburst or some rapid decompression, and the pilot has decided to lose altitude that quickly because of a rapid decompression or suspected decompression? These things probably happen quite relatively frequently, and before you are sensitive to them and looking for them, you don't notice, and then we become hyper vigilant to any sudden loss in altitude of anything that sounds like a 737. And now maybe this is something that happens more than we think. So I don't know. Who
I
knows what this is, and we need to look at the data.
Ben, I just googled. They say 737-800 does not have MCAS, so that means there's another serious issue now that needs to be investigated.
Well, maybe, but I mean, what information actually do we have about this? That an aircraft lost a lot of height in a small amount of time. Cool. And what else do we actually know for sure?
Okay.
Yeah.
So
The
continuing
So,
on.
so if that's all we know, then it could be a million different things.
Yep, the China plane black box. I mean, they are trying to retrieve data now in the US. So let's see.
I think this might actually accelerate China's development of their own domestic airplane brand or company. So that might be an interesting development out of all of this.
Okay. The SEC sides with Amazon shareholders asking for a vote on greater tax disclosures. One of the first times the regulator has granted such a request. Time magazine has a headline about inside Kiev's IT office, whose workers have spent the past 5 weeks adapting and repurposing everyday tech like the Kiev digital smartphone app for wartime. Facebook introduces something called sharing to Reels, an integration that lets developers add the ability to post videos directly to Facebook Reels from their third-party apps. Twitter begins drastically reducing the reach of Russian government accounts and will remove tweets from government-affiliated accounts with prisoners of war. Remove tweets from government-affiliated accounts with prisoners of war. It'll ask government or state-affiliated media accounts to take down pictures featuring prisoners of war. Uber says it plans to add long-distance travel bookings to its UK app in 2022, and also is introducing inner-city trains, coaches, and flights. And then you got a whole bunch of fundraising announcements. South Korea says Google can't block developers from providing an in-app link to an outside website to buy digital goods under the country's app payment law. There's Korea leading the charge globally against Apple and Google, empowering developers to be able to charge how they want to charge the users of their apps. Let's all hope everyone else joins them. The next one is Dropbox launches something called Shop, which lets creators sell digital content directly to consumers. As I was ranting,
What?
yeah, I was ranting about Twitter coming out with this soon. This one, I'll pin it to the top of the room. There you go. Thank you, Cheryl. Dropbox Shop, a platform that allows creators to sell digital content directly to their customers, is now available in open beta. Dropbox announced on Tuesday. The company is also introducing new updates to the platform and adding tipping capabilities. You can now also customize your storefront and URLs and embedded HTML codes. Dropbox Shop launched in private beta last year and allows users to create product listings for digital content. You can add content directly from Dropbox, set a custom image, audio or video preview, and then list your price. Creators now also have the option to enable tipping. Dropbox will then create a shareable or embeddable link that you can paste into social media posts, emails, web pages, and more. You can create your own e-commerce storefront, edit your profile, and customize your shop URL to display your products. Dropbox is partnered with Stripe and PayPal to let creators give their customers multiple payment options in addition to major credit cards and Google Pay. Users can also review and track sales data and see customer info such as traffic sources and historical transactions.
I don't
But
know.
this,
This sounds like a Shopify for digital content, but as a first to mover, I'm not sure that they've cinched the entire concept because Dropbox is so limited. Again, when you say Dropbox and then this ecosystem for digital purchases, there's a disconnect there because I imagine Dropbox as a saving space for my photos, not an ecosystem for sales.
so I've got a different perspective, Tyler, if that's okay.
Sure.
So my initial reaction was very similar to Sharon's. What the hell's Dropbox have to do with this? And then I remembered our product creation process in the business I own, Game Dev TV, is well, we actually don't use Dropbox. We use Google Drive now. But for a long time, all of the videos that we wanted to serve up to our millions of students were on Dropbox. Basically, the rendered video files, our end product, our MP4 files, were sitting in Dropbox in a very nicely organized folder structure by course name and section and certain video number. And there was absolute busy work involved in taking that content and copying it onto a given platform like Udemy, or in our case now Teachable, or whatever else we might use in the future. And then when we make changes to that content, which we do very regularly, like every day, a given course gets at least one update, you would have to render the file, put it into Dropbox, because that's where we store it to share it with each other, and then upload it to all of these different platforms and mess around with that whole thing. So I think the thing that Dropbox has got here is there's a lot of creators have already got their actual product well organized in a Dropbox, and I've for a long time and have sometimes with small digital marketing launches actually shared the files via Dropbox, but Dropbox don't like you doing that at any scale, or didn't used to, despite how damn convenient it is as a creator to just to share an existing Dropbox folder with the public at large. But they didn't do that because of bandwidth limits and blah blah blah. So to now say, you're in the same way that with Twitter, the customers, the network is already there, the customers already there. Dropbox already have the data, a lot of creators' data, and in some cases in a format that is almost exactly ready to go, and you literally share it to the public and put a paywall on it. It's a bit more complicated than that, but I think that they've got onto something there. Anyway, that's me
Yeah,
rambling over.
yeah, I like the way you phrase it, which is um, the way Dropbox themselves phrases it is that you can create an e-commerce storefront, edit your profile, and customize your shop URL to display your products. Uh, Examples of the type of content that can be sold with Dropbox Shop include educational courses and materials, digital art, graphic design, music and audio, writing and publishing, personal finance spreadsheets, gaming tutorials, fitness and wellness videos, film photography, animation, digital tools, and more. Dropbox Shop supports numerous file formats for image, audio, and video uploads. You can also upload multiple file types for each listing. And it essentially is a way to sell your files. Put a paywall on your files. And I imagine the selfish motive here is one of the options they're going to give the buyer is to download the file to their machine. But I bet you they're going to say they're going to somehow in the interface prioritize the option to save to your own Dropbox. So they're hopeful that this will lead people to not download the stuff to their machine, but to leave it in the Dropbox cloud. And then when you do it that way, Dropbox ostensibly only saves one version of that file, anyways.
And
So
if
they
their
get
charging system is as it used to be, they'll charge both users for it. Although I'm not sure what will happen with Shop. But they used to, certainly, if I shared a file with you, they'd charge me and you for the storage, which was just despite what exactly you've just said, is that they only need to store it once. Sorry to interrupt.
right. But I think the idea is it's a little bit of a Trojan horse to get people to sign up for Dropbox to store these files and create their own stores and everything else. It's just one way to think of it is sort of the YouTube of files instead of video files, essentially watchable video files. And they say they're competing alongside the likes of with the launch of Dropbox Shop, the company is looking to compete with other online platforms that allow creators and users to sell digital products such as Shopify. And by the way, that's my big rant yesterday was that Twitter is going to get into this game in the very near future, but with a twist that they will have the digital payments
Tyler.
built into the wallet of every account. Yes, David.
Or maybe for Ben, would it help to make an NFT versioning of your past? Like if you took that curriculum 2 years ago, maybe you want to access not the new version, or you want to have two-tiered pricing. You want to say it's $20 for a one-time purchase if you want to have a lifetime renewed, keep it updated. I could see it going into the NFT verse. If, as long as they are the one hosting all the data, they could, not Trojan horses. This is the roadmap for data efficiency.
I haven't got my yellow eyes on now, but I think you're going to know that I'm going to say no. I don't. I think that's a solution in search of a problem, and we can very easily do that by just selling a different copy of the product without NFTs and blockchains and all the cost and
No,
complexity
I
that
mean,
that entails. Great money spinning
okay,
scheme,
well,
but I'm not sure it's necessary to use an NFT for that at all. Um,
okay. So make the NFT your degree that you issue at the end of the curriculum. I don't care what the NFT is. Can you use versioning and Dropbox and tiered pricing to keep old versions and a whole mess of stuff you might not want to keep up to date on, but you can essentially charge people the legacy price and the continuing prices.
yeah,
That's
interesting
just a
idea.
thought I had.
Yeah, and it could also solve another problem, which is that one of the biggest things we get from our students is they want offline access to the content. And that's often because they're on a poor internet connection. And if you're in India or somewhere and you have a bad connection, you can just because you can't stream the content doesn't mean you can't consume it. You can leave it downloading overnight and then consume for 12 hours and consume 2 hours of it the next day. Therefore, you only need a sixth of the bandwidth that you'd need to stream it because 12 divided by 2 is 6. So the Dropbox already has all of this, of course. So if you then say to your customers, yes, you can, it goes to your Dropbox, but also you can have offline access if you want. They're providing quite a lot in one place, which is cool. The competition, of course, I would have thought would come from Google here because what Google have done with Google Drive is very clever. Is we've been dragged in as a company to Google Drive as an ecosystem because of Google Sheets, Google Doc, and Google Docs, and to some extent Google whatever you call it, the presentation system. And because Sheets and Docs are so damn useful, we use them because they're so highly collaborative. Now, at this point, you've now got a whole bunch of files you need to organize into some sort of structure for your Sheets and your Docs, and Google Drive just happens to do everything Dropbox does as well. So there's a big drag to say, you know what, just use Google Drive for everything. And we actually migrated away from Dropbox because of that. Therefore I know that Google Drive has the same functionality that we need because we're not missing anything as creators and so forth. So it does seem that Google could easily add this offering, and it'd be interesting to get Tyler's thoughts on how that then ties in with what they're doing with shopping on YouTube and everything else. But yeah, certainly Google would be positioned for that.
Sorry, I missed the thrust there. What was the?
Well, the thrust is that Google could do the same thing with Google Drive, and it would integrate
Yeah,
even more strongly into Google Shopping and like.
yeah, and more directly integrated with YouTube as well. Because if you put a video file in Google Drive, it could cross
Yep,
post to
exactly.
YouTube automatically, whatnot.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think Google Drive is in a better position for sure because one of the things that Google doesn't really do that it really easily could is when you search for files, like you want a poster, a business card template, any kind of templates, any kind of legal documents, templates for example, a non-disclosure agreement, templates for all of these things. Currently, I'm going to do it right now just to prove the point. If I Google search for NDA, NDA template, here we go. I get 5 ads, 1, 2, 3, 4 ads, and then a bunch of websites like legaltemplates.net, eforms.com, rocketlawyer.com, who have their own NDA templates. Google Drive has millions of NDAs, and with its very smart algorithms, could sort out what are likely to be the very best examples of all of that. And you get the idea. They could go and cover every document type you could ever think of. Legal agreements of all kinds, leasing agreements, purchasing agreements, all of them. And they don't do that at all. And that they're really not tapping into Google Docs in any kind of a way that I'm aware of. They certainly could, the same way they do videos. Video files is just one type of file. They can do the same with all the audio files and text files and PDFs and Excel sheets. Could go on for days. And of course, give people the option to monetize those files. So, yeah, I'm a little surprised that these technologies they're not that complicated. I'm not sure why we don't already have them. The
Yeah, and
next,
Google Drive files are different in kind to share. I mean, I've worked with a lawyer recently for some contracts, and they were sending Word documents back and forth and talking about which version of it. And in some ways, that was good, but it's archaic compared to the live nature of a Google Doc. I'm sure it's very stripped down in features, but I think there'll be some different in kind ways that you can do things with Google Live documents and slideshows and the rest of it as well. So yeah, definitely, it's definitely a watch this space case.
Google Maps gets estimated toll road prices. Map details like stoplights and stop signs, directions on Apple Watch for Google Maps. That's cool. And an iOS widget that shows pinned trips. That's cool too. Apple confirms it has been piloting a feature launching soon or very soon that lets developers like Disney Plus automatically charge users for subscription price hikes. Okay. There was a couple other here. Canada's government introduces new legislation that would force major online platforms like Google and Facebook to negotiate deals with publishers, like has already happened in Australia. And those are your big, boring headlines for today. And now we get into the tweets, as we always do. Does anyone have a tweet that they saw, or any article that they saw since we met last time that they want to share? As I now come, yeah.
My first
Yeah.
time doing it, Tyler, I sent it to Tech News Around the World, Was that through mail, or I don't know how to submit it, but I tried
Okay,
yesterday.
the great question. So anyone can quote unquote submit. If you find an article worth sharing, you can do two things. You can tweet that article from your Twitter account. Just add our Twitter account as part of your tweet, which is simply at. You can do that by adding the at sign and then TNATW, which are the first letters of Tech News Around the World, and then we see your tweets and all the tweets that I'm looking at. And thank you to Katerina and David Gerbino and Bibi and everyone who shares all of these. Evan's got a whole bunch today. We get Ken usually shares a bunch. Robert's got some today. Eric's got some today. And if you look at the Tech News Twitter account, you'll see that we are retweeting our favorite tweets that people found. So if you find a good one and we like it, we'll retweet your tweet. But we can only find your tweet if you include our Twitter account as inside your tweet. If you tag us in your tweet, but not using a hashtag, using the at sign. So the first one that I found. Yes, go ahead.
Tyler.
Yeah.
I have the one the quite interesting for Africa is Jumia, one of the very first one to be a unicorn in Africa, and then of course they had to enlist and restructure, but doing amazing now. Just the partnership with UPS. That UPS is trying to take advantage of, that last mile delivery system that Jumia really developed for the last several years, for doing delivery for them. So UPS customers can get their packages, especially in outside of the cities in Africa, most African countries. So now they will use that infrastructure, the logistics infrastructure Jumia has, in all the countries that they have presence in Ghana and I think Morocco, Nigeria, and then they will keep on adding their partnerships. So for me, is like really nice to see African companies getting really to be mature and getting these type of partnerships and development with global companies. So that's one of the news today.
Okay. Anybody else with one before we jump into the mountain of tweets?
For me, as a Polish person who lives in the West, it's kind of surprising that Poland is open to nukes stationed in its country now amid the Russia-Ukraine war. So that's something that's always been kind of discussed, but never actually implemented, and now it seems to be much closer. And like that doomsday clock, it feels like we're going in the direction of doomsday. And given Russia's recent kind of not so they're not doing that well in Ukraine, both in terms of the media war as well as the actual war. It seems like nuclear weapons are being brought onto the table, and that's always anxiety inducing. And so something that I'm keeping an eye out for.
Right. That was one of the biggest headlines of the year thus far, which happened in the past 24 hours, that Poland's now open to having nuclear missiles, NATO nuclear missiles, based in Poland, that is Putin's worst nightmare, as Poland's just a hop, skip, and a jump from Russia. And those missiles, the closer you get to Moscow, the more scared Putin gets. And this has hints of the Cuban Missile Crisis, where the Russians had missiles in Cuba, and that was scaring the bejesus out of America. JFK, if I recall correctly.
But
And
Tyler,
yes,
it seems like we're still living in 60s. I mean, these missiles are like, 30, 40 years ago, if you were talking about actually putting them in Turkey as vis-a-vis into Cuba.
yeah,
We are talking about ultrasonic missiles now. I mean, it takes, 1/10 of the time to actually reach the destination. It doesn't matter whether they are actually, being placed in the UK or it's probably going to be taking almost the same time from going from Poland, to Moscow as opposed to like from Scotland to Moscow. The technology has actually superseded, and it just got to a point where, I mean, it doesn't matter where they are placed next door or is placed like 3,000 miles away, because it's going to take the same amount of time to actually get to the destination. So, irrespective of that, yeah, it could be like a mental thing that okay, it's just next door, but other than that, it doesn't make any.
Karum, there is
Yeah.
a very big difference though, which is the detection time. So, kind of turning your argument on itself, if you launch from Poland, then the time between launch and impact is so small you haven't got time to detect and intercept compared to something coming. Seconds count in that scenario. So I think that's the point. There was another completely separate issue. Are these bloody things working now? I mean, I go back and forth on whether we want these things in the world. We've got them. So there's no choice. So who cares? But on one hand, they've done for a long time the job of preventing escalation, and you could argue they're doing the job of preventing escalation right now. But they are failing us in the West's standoff attitude towards going and doing anything in Ukraine. I don't know what other people think. Are the nuclear weapons serving us in this conflict? Because every decision that's being made by the West seems to be based on the fact we're scared of nuclear conflict.
Hmm.
So
To
Ben,
me
just
is
quickly on that particular. Just quickly on the Ben's point, Ben, I truly take that point, but at the same time, like wherever the location is going to be, the other party is going to actually have the satellites fixated on that particular point, and you get that in literally, a few seconds that okay, a missile is being fired. The only way you can actually save that and not, give a surprise to the opponent is through the submarines. So that's the only way you can actually surprise them. But as long as it's on the land, it doesn't matter. I mean, counterpoint on that particular point. But yeah, sorry, just wanted to make that point.
well, you have to go extremely high to go extremely fast because of the atmosphere. So so you're still exposing a missile to a lot of opportunity to be intercepted. If it's going hypersonic, it's going to be going hypersonic at high altitude. So and you don't necessarily have to go to high altitude and go hypersonic if you're very close. You've got lots of different flight profiles available to you if you're close.
in general, to Ben's point of the nuclear weapons and the West saying that, they don't want to escalate into that, is I think the side effect of this entire conflict is going to be the race to acquiring nuclear weapons. It just seems to sound that that's the actual deterrent for any country to invade you, even if the West keeps on saying that, oh, we don't do anything into Russia because they have nuclear weapons. And even in other cases that we have seen, Pakistan, in other places that we have been hearing, it looks like the only time countries are really hesitant to invade or do anything in a country is if you have nuclear weapons. So now, especially dictators, authoritarian regimes are going to be saying, oh, you know what, I better start, acquiring nuclear weapons so that nobody's going to touch me. So this is going to be really, really the bad side of the side effect of this conflict.
And just to put some context on it, Ukraine in 1991 had 3,000 nuclear warheads. So if they had held on to at least some of those, maybe there would be a sort of deterrent to any sort of invasion. But yeah.
Okay, speaking of that, Noam Chomsky is in the news for an interview he just did where he's quoted as saying, we're approaching the most dangerous point in human history. The US professor, now 93, talking about the climate catastrophe and the threat of nuclear war. Chomsky says, the first article that I wrote for the elementary school newspaper was on the fall of Barcelona in 1939, and it charted the advance of the grim cloud of fascism across the world. Quote, I haven't changed my opinion since. It's just gotten worse. We're approaching.
Chomsky's pretty awesome, though. He replies to emails in like pretty fast, given his age. So if you ever want to reach out to him, he's actually quite approachable. So get props to him.
We're approaching the most dangerous point in human history. We are now facing the prospect of destruction of organized human life on Earth. The next quote says, "Do not go gentle in that good night," or for anyway, yeah, he doesn't have much to worry about at 93. I don't. Hopefully, he won't live to see the end. So the the next tweet that I have is from Katerina, that a new non-destructive DNA method opens up new opportunities. The new method of obtaining ancient genome data without damaging source material has been developed by University of Otago researchers, creating new opportunities like Jurassic Park. Because the idea is you can bring back fragile DNA samples, essentially, like hair from a woolly mammoth or whatever. And then next one from Katerina about a safe and powerful robotics for near human tasks. Robots mowing lawns in a form of robotic assistance. Oh, but there are currently few concepts for robotic assistance in other tasks, and it's an article about all of the investment going into robotics. The next one's from the Wall Street Journal. It says, "We will kill you. How Russia silenced its anti-war movement." Which was brewing weeks ago, although we don't hear much about it now, do we? No, we don't. Why is that? Well, that's the subject of this article. It says that Alexander Teplyankov, Teplyakov, 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 Alexander Teplyakov wanted to speak out against the war in Ukraine, but feared landing in prison if he took part in a public protest. So the Russian activist designed an anti-war sticker featuring Russian and Ukrainian flags and the phrase "No to War," and posted and distributed thousands of them around Moscow. He got into trouble anyway. Russian police hauled the 23-year-old into the police station on March 1st, according to a copy of his police records reviewed by the Wall Street Journal. He said he was repeatedly beaten over the head by one officer while in custody. A second officer pressed a pistol to his leg and coerced him into divulging the name of a fellow activist, etc. So they're understandably cracking down very hard on these anti-war protesters because they correctly fear a revolution, as they had 100 years ago. And I wouldn't put it past them to threaten murder for these protesters. But that's the gist. That's the headline. The headline says, "We will kill you: How Russia silenced its anti-war movement." The next one.
That's very troubling. Just to quickly comment, I think they're also doing this to the journalists, as we mentioned the other day. And I think this is troubling because in general, we try to think of, hey, protest opposing the government as something critical to democracies and freedom. So we see a big separation now between countries that are going in the direction of freedom and those that are going perhaps in the direction of dictatorship or oppression. And it's a very troubling pattern. So I'm concerned, and especially if you go on RT.com and watch the propaganda there, it's next level Hollywood stuff. So definitely a very problematic conflict.
Okay, next up is from a TechCrunch article that says tech workers describe detentions and interrogations as they try to flee Russia. The mass exodus of IT specialists has been met with hostility from Moscow. On the evening of February 23rd, just a few hours before Vladimir Putin's army crossed into Ukraine territory, a message from Amazon arrived in the inbox of Vladimir Smirnov, a programmer from St. Petersburg. It was a work permit for a software engineer position in Ireland. Smirnov had begun interviewing for the position at Amazon in January when U.S. intelligence first stepped up its concerns about Putin's plans for a war in Ukraine. The fact that the war was truly coming became clear to Smirnov 2 days earlier during Putin's televised address to the nation, in which he recognized the independence of Donetsk and Luhansk republics, Ukrainian territories. Quote, "He gave his verdict to the nation and indirectly declared war," Smirnov said. "My whole family watched that vicious speech and trembled. It's one thing to know that war has been declared. It's quite another to wake up on February 24 to the news of bombings. On the very same morning, Smirnov was in no doubt that he needed to leave Russia. Having dressed, he went to take a COVID test so he could fly to neighboring Georgia as soon as possible, after which he would travel to Ireland. Nick Shevchenko, the 22-year-old chief executive at a startup called We Love No Code, also decided to leave Russia, fearing that martial law would be introduced in Russia. Forcing the borders shut, he bought a plane ticket to Portugal, where he remains now. Quote, first, they closed the borders, and then they force you to kill. I'm fit for military service, unfortunately, but I don't want to kill innocent people. Natalia Chebotar, a former top manager at Russia's big tech company Yandex, left Russia with her family when Putin ordered the placement of all nuclear deterrent forces in a special regime. A veiled threat of nuclear posturing, and so that was enough for her to get the fuck out. Anyway, I'm sure the article goes on to detail what kind of measures the state is taking to prevent this incredible brain drain from happening.
Yeah, just a quick comment, if I may. I think this shows that the Russian people are not necessarily in alignment with the Russian administration or the Russian government. So when we say the Russians, those Germans are not these Germans. When we say, when we're talking about this conflict, we can see that there is compassion in the people, and just a few bad apples don't necessarily have to spoil the whole bunch. So just something to keep in mind, so we don't necessarily paint everyone with the same brushstrokes.
Just to give perspective, Ethiopia, one of the biggest brain drain happened during the socialist, military junta. And surprisingly, Russia was the big support during that time, during the Cold War between the West versus East. And so Ethiopia was for 17 years a very, military based authoritarianism and socialism, really similar to what Russia is now, even then. And thousands of people got assassinated and killed, and there was no dissent, there was no nothing. All we, my parents and everybody have that reflection and tell us all is that all they can hear was just the state-sponsored media. You weren't even allowed to listen to anything. If you are caught listening to anything else, that you would be really arrested, if not killed. So thousands of educated Ethiopians. That was the very first wave of Ethiopian brain drain, and how the country actually just disintegrated, and all the things that happened. That was one of the declines for Ethiopia from a great star during the kingdoms. That I ended up one of the problems that we have even today started because of what happened then. So it is not easy to go through this type of regime and this type of leadership, and the country, the people, the economy. It just stayed for generations, and the impact is huge, not only in the country but even in the area. So yeah, I
I
can
think there's
imagine. Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
done.
I think there's another element that, especially, it's not just about the brain drain, like, the intelligentsia of the actual country, but also the people who are affluent, and have got lots of money, obviously, and especially in the business and all that, how they're going to actually survive. I mean, the whole country is sort of like blockaded pretty much. Like, you cannot actually do the transaction, nothing can come in or go out financially unless you are part of the government, who is like actually supplying the energy and all of that. So any business has to sort of like occur within the boundaries, within the borders. So all those people, I mean, they have a bigger business community. Like, for instance, in Dubai, I mean, there's a lot of properties being owned by the Russians, and many other places around the world. I mean, those guys are simply cannot afford to actually kind of be in Russia and survive. They clearly see that there is no path for them to survive in the future, and all the calculations are telling us that this war is going to last in a similar fashion it did in Afghanistan and other places. So they clearly see the move out bit for them, and as a clear business strategy for them. So That's another angle to the whole equation.
Yeah, when we saw on CNN, my husband and I, just a few days ago, a lot of Russians lined up to get sugar. And I just remember my childhood as a kid. We used to line up for hours to just buy bread. you know, it just, I couldn't believe it. That was just like, it was, in my head, like a photocopy memory. So when I saw that, I say to him, before I left for Canada and now back, and I saw that, and I say, oh my gosh, this is my childhood in Ethiopia during the socialism thing as a kid, lining up for bread to just buy bread. So yeah, those things
It
happen.
happens in Shanghai right now, so.
Okay. So the next article from Karam is inside the fight to make housing more affordable. Builders say bringing people closer to retail could improve the back-end economics of home construction, but affordability remains a challenge for now. And that's a clever point. Instead of
That's actually something I think Elon is also investing in. He famously now lives in some sort of pre-manufactured or prefab type house, and they actually have sold out all of like they have a huge waiting list, everything, and it actually shows that the economics of construction are very well served with like the scaling of industrialization, because a lot of waste happens on site. So this is probably another area where Elon's probably going to pick up another 100 billion if things go smoothly. So exciting to see that.
So typically, what's been happening, like obviously in the U.S., is just like a builder moves in, buys the land and builds up like kind of apartment building or like few houses or condos and all that, and that's how I mean historically it's been happening. But if you look at it, the way the economic trajectory is going to be in the next 10 years is the inflation is going to go through the roof. It's already going at a level where Feds are looking into actually increasing drastically the interest rate. So ultimately, what's going to happen is people won't be able to actually afford those, all the builders who are actually building the new houses. And then there's going to be spiral effect. And that's where it's needed that, some bigger projects should come into being where it's not just about actually building, let's say like 8 condos or like 12 or 20 condos, or like apartment building, which has like about, let's say 20 or 20 or 30 or so apartment building. Imagine like actually in my neighborhood recently, this builder actually moved in and they built about 180 apartment buildings, and those are like high end apartments. So that make more economic sense for people, and this way he could actually sell at a much lower rate to people, because that was sort of like very economical for people. So it was about two-thirds the price of the actual price would have been if it was a smaller project.
Yeah, and to put some perspective on this, I think the house that Elon currently lives in is a prefab that costs around $50,000. So the world's richest man lives in a very inexpensive house. So take that, Warren Buffett.
Did he get a 30-year fixed on
okay. Next up is where did that one go from Monica? Hold on. Here we go. There it is. Monica sent one from Wired. It says, what Twitter is really planning for crypto? The duo behind Twitter Crypto say that NFT profile pics and crypto tipping are just the beginning. And then Monica writes, what Twitter will Elon Musk's appointment on the board accelerate the shape of Twitter's Web3 avatar? Something. Let's see what this article says. Let's see if they figured out what I was predicting yesterday. Um, it talks about someone named Tess Rienerson, a Berlin-based American computer scientist um, who works on blockchains and joined Twitter at a crucial moment. Jack Dorsey who was a very pro Bitcoin company CEO, would leave a few weeks later to be replaced by the current CTO or the previous CTO. As crypto went mainstream, Twitter crypto is getting started. While Reinerson works with people all across the company, her team is still under 10 people, although more hires are in the pipeline, judging from recent job postings. So it's worth asking what's next. I caught up over a video call with Reinerson and Crawford to talk about where Twitter crypto is headed. And then she asked the first question, why does Twitter have a crypto unit? And the answer is, we really see crypto and what we're calling Web3 as something that could be this incredibly powerful tool that would unlock a lot of our users. The whole crypto world is like an internet of money, an internet of value that our users can potentially tap into to create new ways of owning their content, monetizing their content, owning their identity, and even relating to each other. Oh, wow. She said it even more exactly than even I could, which makes sense because they have a lot of meetings about it on a daily basis. That's beautifully said. The whole crypto world is like an internet of money, an internet of value that our users can tap into to create new ways of owning and monetizing their content, owning their identity, and even relating to each other. That's right. That's what Twitter's cooking up. Perfectly said. How to own and monetize your content on Twitter. Monetize your content and show ownership of your content on Twitter and own your identity. That's what I was saying. Where PayPal is interesting, it enables transactions, but it doesn't have the products and it doesn't really have the social network dimension that Twitter has. Twitter has the social network dimension, is adding the products, and is very soon will be adding the crypto digital payment layer to all of this. And this is why it's going to get very interesting. And that's why one of the creators of PayPal would find this wildly interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of like everybody likes merchandise. If you like a particular creator, you want to support them, and having a piece of that history in a way that's recognizable by others, definitely something. Like I'm just waiting until Tyler basically makes a Tech News Around the World mug NFT because I'd be down to get that. So that would be pretty awesome. And I think that kind of pattern in general is what we're seeing happen now.
So thank you for that great find from Wired, Monica. I just retweeted that to the Tech News Twitter account. The next one's from BB. It's from CNN. It says, as the world reacts in horror to the Russian activities, war crimes in Bucha, Ukraine, China state media strikes a different tone. In one report, a caption citing Russia with the words Ukrainians directed a good show flashes over heavily blurred footage from a Ukrainian town. Shocking images showing the bodies of civilians scattered across the street of Bucha have sparked global horror, but China's sort of downplaying it. And that's how you know whose side China's on, which you already knew if you were a regular tech newser before this invasion even happened. I told you what was going to happen. Did I not tell you what was going to happen? I've been telling you this shit was going to... By the way, as soon as, whenever this whole Russia-Ukraine thing ends, which, by the way, I told you that the U.S. does not want it to end. And today, we just heard one of America's most famous generals say this could go on for years. As I said at the beginning, America has no interest in this thing ending anytime soon. It's in America's interest that this thing drag on as long as Putin can dare to drag it out. And that's what's happening. So, by the way, whenever it does end,
And why is that?
we want to bleed Russia dry. We want to ground them into dust.
That's assuming that things were the way they were before the invasion. Things are not the same. That's the problem.
Well,
Quid
I
pro quo for Syria and Afghanistan.
the the more concerning thing. I mean, that point aside, you could debate that point all you like, but hold that, put a pin in that one. The next point is whatever the outcome, whenever that first round between Russia, Ukraine, call it a U.S. proxy war if you want, or don't. It doesn't matter to me. The point is that whenever that bout ends, the next likely bout is a similar sort of scenario with China, where we coax China into somehow softly provoke China into attacking Taiwan when we're ready for it. Now, watch this. And I've been saying this for weeks, but watch the headline that just came out today. Boom, boom, boom. Where is it? There it is. Jeff G. Here it is. The headline says U.S. approves $100 million of Patriot weapon support for Taiwan. Potential sale is the third since Joe Biden became president in 2021 and is likely to upset China. Yeah, no shit. It's going to upset China. And the U.S. is going to start weaponizing Taiwan massively and preparing it for the massive invasion. Because we control when that invasion occurs. How do we do that? By simply whispering Taiwan is an independent country. Just by thinking that, China has no choice, none, zero choice but to attack. And what happens when Taiwan is armed to the gills and has mined the Straits of Taiwan so that it blows up lots? Don't get me wrong, it's going to make what's going in Ukraine look relatively mild. This is going to get super crazy intense. Because, by the way, Taiwan is the size of Kyiv. It's not. Ukraine's one of the biggest, geographical countries. Taiwan is not. Taiwan is incredibly small relatively to Ukraine. So it's a whole different ball game, and China can do the air. They're already doing the airspace game. China already today has air superiority over Taiwan. Today, now. That's why they're flying those planes every single day over Taiwan, so that you can't time you don't know that the whole thing has started until the bomb drops, because they're already overhead every day. So that's not news. You
Yeah,
lose.
Tyler, technically not over our airspace. It's the air defense identification zone. So we both play this on the side of, actually it's still the public airspace. So,
It's
but
20
it
about
sounds
20
sensitive to
kilometers.
us and
Yeah,
to the US, of course, but technically not the fighters are not over Taiwan's airspace directly. So it's a space Taiwan declared to be the air defense zone.
right.
So yeah,
Which
so
they
okay,
they
please.
can launch those fighters that are in the air off the coast of Taiwan, could fire missiles from that position or make a left turn and within, I don't know, 5 seconds be over Taiwan's airspace. So
Yeah,
At that
both
point,
I have the
does
ability as well.
Taiwan semiconductor explode?
that's a great question, because that China would likely not want that to happen.
Yeah, so the act the bill the weapons Biden just agreed to sell Taiwan is just like you said, the Patriot series. That's the surface to air missiles. Most of them are from protect our, just like you say, airspace. That's the first wave attack for most strategy and analysis. So and that's the weapon for defense, not for attack.
And thanks to that earlier FSB agent who leaked that document saying, "Oh, by the way, China's planning on invading Taiwan in the fall, just so you know. So I wonder if that's any sort of indication of what is likely to go down. But I think it's not even a few seconds, Tyler. I think it's like a fraction of a second. If it's going near the speed of sound, 20 kilometers is nothing. So
That's my point. Is it's just a rounding error to say that it's in or not in their airspace. I mean, um, that's going to be a fast and furious conflict. They can, I assume, put lots of mines somehow in the strait to protect from the amphibious landings, which they're going to have to prevent somehow. Um, if, if that day, whenever that day arrives, is going to be one for the ages. That's like, what's that final scene in Lord of the Rings where those, you got the Eye of Sauron in the background, and you've got the orcs versus the whatever, and it's with the elephants and all that shit. I mean, wild. It's going to be wild.
yeah, the Taiwan conflict will make that look like a picnic. But in general, historically speaking, I think the wars in the Orient have been so aggressive and focused, just in terms of the different partners and other people participating in these conflicts. They even have their own name, the Sino Wars. So just realize, while the rest of us have been having wars, they've been having their own wars, and it's been quite intense and fierce. So definitely make it look. It'll make Lord of the Rings look like a walk in the park.
So back to a headline: CNN from BB: U.S. tested hypersonic missile in mid-March, but kept it quiet to avoid escalating tensions with Russia as President Joe Biden was about to travel to Europe. Well, those would come in insanely handy in the Taiwan scenario, because the U.S. is going to need to have these based somewhere, ostensibly Guam, or where's the nearest U.S. base? Oh, probably Okinawa.
Okinawa, or even South Korea.
South Korea, Okinawa, Guam. If they have hypersonic missiles, I hate even thinking of having these thoughts. This makes Ukraine look like kindergarten. And I say that with all due respect, but man, is this going to be just a bloodbath of epic proportions if China invades Taiwan, and the world's reaction to China, and how that plays out, and wild, 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 wild. Okay, the next one is that from Jeff G. from Bloomberg: Russian car sales collapse as the war leads to supply and price shocks. Russian car sales plunged last month as sanctions imposed over the invasion of Ukraine battered the ruble, and many global auto companies joined the boycotts. Yeah, well, the cars is going to be the first of things the sales to plummet. Sales of everything is going to plummet very soon. The next is from CNN that 42 unknown genes discovered for Alzheimer's disease. 42 previously unknown genes have been discovered for Alzheimer's disease. An unprecedented global study of Alzheimer's disease has uncovered an additional 42 genes that may affect a person's risk for developing Alzheimer's. Now, the question is, would you like to know if you have any of those 42 genes? You very well might. I know Cheryl would not. However, if those genes can be expressed due to your diet or your sleep or other activities, or you could potentially reduce the potential for those genes to be expressed by actions you take today, would you want to know? As somebody whose grandmother had Alzheimer's, I absolutely do want to know. And in fact, I took 23andMe like the week it came out, specifically to find out if I had such genes. But not all the genes had been discovered. More are being discovered all the time. That's what this headline's about today. The 42 previously unknown genes have been discovered that are linked to Alzheimer's. I really want to know if I have those, so that I can take whatever steps necessary to reduce the likelihood of those genes being expressed. So that's the startup that, again, we could ring the cash register if you like. Arcus AI, that I'm advising, is doing exactly this, where they're going to do a full genetic sequence, and you can keep updated on a weekly and monthly basis on a subscription of all of the new genes and links and findings connecting the genes that you have to diseases that you might want to know about, so that when these links are made, you can be notified if you have the genes in question. So,
Didn't
And if I may,
Angelina? Oh, sorry.
go ahead, please.
No, I was just gonna ask Tyler if this was the same or a different company that Angelina Jolie, she got something, right? They told her about her
right,
cancer gene and stuff like that, and then she
breast.
took a measure,
She wanted to know about breast cancer, from what I.
right?
Yeah, we actually used that in our presentation because she paid tens of thousands of dollars to find one. She was concerned about one particular gene, and that doesn't really scale. And the amount of time that it took her to do it, the amount of money it took her to do it, we can cut that down from multiple days and tens of $1,000s down to nearly instant and incredibly cheap. So we, in fact, mention her in the presentation as
A
a.
recent guest on Katerina's Science Society actually talked about kind of the next wave of advancement, how microRNA, little snippets of 20 or 30 nucleotides long, that actually regulate either help express or help suppress certain parts of our genome, which adds into that likelihood of, okay, well, I have this predisposition. How likely is it to express itself? Well, the missing key or one of the missing keys to that puzzle is this tracking of microRNA. So, as John had previously alluded, that the Bayesian nature of these kind of measures just for the genomes or the genes perhaps creates a little bit of anxiety. So to reduce that and perhaps error in prediction or diagnosis, we had to find these new additional factors, and one of them happens to be this microRNA. So if anyone is curious, the replay, I believe, is available, and if you want to check it out, it's the Science Society. So the researcher came over and gave a talk about it. So really exciting stuff.
Okay, now check out this next one, and kudos to Jeff G for finding this from CNN. Top U.S. general says that the potential for significant international conflict is increasing. The top U.S. military general officer told the top U.S. military officer told lawmakers Tuesday that the world is becoming more unstable and the quote potential for significant international conflict is increasing because the nature of these things is it's a barroom brawl. When two people start slugging it out in a bar, that greatly increases the odds that more people in the bar start brawling because no one wants to be the crazy idiot to break social norms and start throwing the first punches. But once a fight is well underway and people are distracted and no one's condemning those people for brawling, and that brawl, everyone's watching the fight go on and on. Now you've destigmatized the room to the potential for further fighting. And I'm sure he has other interesting points that I'm unaware of. But hence my warning that things could escalate in other parts of the world. Apple.
And sadly also, other crises don't even get any attention at all. What's happening economically in Sri Lanka is huge, but we don't hear much about it. So there are many other things in the globe that's happening, but because of what's happening, and including bad news as well, right? Like Boris Johnson, sliding through the crisis that he was having. So a lot of things will be just going under the radar when things like this big global event happens, right?
Yeah. The next one is from BB that Apple has officially announced that WWDC, the Worldwide Developer Conference, their big annual event for 2022, which will be on June 6th, will be online only. So it will not be at the Moscone Center as it traditionally is there down in downtown San Francisco.
Didn't they move it from Moscone to their new HQ when they had like here's our Steve Jobs thing, or do they still keep WWDC at Moscone?
That's a great question. I think they keep it at Moscone because it's like tens of thousands of people. I don't think the campus is suited for that.
All those prying eyes and non-handpicked journalists. I used to live right across the street from Moscone. It was a fun whenever they came to town.
The Yerba Buena Park.
Yeah, there was a house that we had with a bunch of like it was like a startup house kind of thing just across the street. It was a lot of fun. It was pretty funny though because at that time San Francisco was going through a bit of a growth curve and is like, all right, turn left if you want to go to the if you want to go to the Moscone with all the tech people. Turn right if you want to get your car broken into. So it's right on that edge.
Yeah, it gets shady quickly over in those parts. Um, yeah, you're not far from the Tenderloin there. Um, but there was that tea garden in the Yerba Buena. I forget the name of it, but
That's
it
a
was
very pleasant garden.
it is lovely. That's a fun little spot to chill out. Okay, reminiscing about the golden days of San Francisco. There, the next
The
one.
transportation center, the Salesforce building, has taken over everything. It's like a giant sea slug that takes over the entire section. It's pretty amazing.
You also had what was the diner that was open late at night right over there?
There's some good ones.
Yeah, there is a good diners right around there,
I used to
and
have a sushi place right down the street. It was my favorite place ever. They it was poorly advertised. They couldn't speak a lick of English. Oh man, but all you can eat sushi. It was absolutely amazing.
you also had the melt sandwiches right there near Third. You
Yep,
also
that's still there.
you also had the W on the corner there at Third. You also have next to the W, Fang, the Asian food place, which was fantastic. I forget the name of the owner and his daughter. That one of my favorite restaurants in anywhere. Fang there, great place. Anyway,
Good times.
yeah, good times. The next one is from Eric that Amazon to ban the sale of 3D printers in the next 2 years. Amazon has announced plans to ban the sale of 3D printers on Amazon as they work to develop their own 3D printer.
What bullshit.
Yeah, that seems like a monopoly kind of move. Like, I wonder if regulators will step in and say, hold on a second, you can sell your own printer, but you're a marketplace. So how does that work?
At
Okay.
least they broadcast a little bit in advance. If anyone starts a 3D printer online marketplace, apparently that's going to be a thing.
Oh, by the
Oh,
way, I went to Uniqlo Ginza today and was looking at watching the 3D knitting machine knitting the clothes. So interesting.
Oh,
Those are pretty
yeah.
cool. But both
Oh,
my
yeah.
favorite.
Cheryl, if you have a link for that, I would love to take a look, or if you have
No,
any references
I
to
was
that,
in the
because
flagship show.
I would love to print my own clothes.
Oh, and
Like,
there's a
like,
breaking news from Uniqlo Ginza. They just launched Uniqlo Coffee.
Good
So there'll
times.
be cafe in the flagship shops.
Um, One brief thing on the 3D printer comment for people that want to get involved in 3D printing. It used to be a lot more difficult. It still has a few quirks, but it's gotten pretty. It can work off the shelf pretty well. There's a whole brand. MakerBot used to be a hub for this, but then they kind of went. They kind of they fell off the bandwagon. There's a brand called Creality, which has it's basically the vanguard of open source type kinds of things in the space. It costs about $200 to get a 3D printer now that you can set it up. Takes less than like an hour or so to set up, and you can start 3D printing your own Yodas and stuff like that. And it's reliable enough that you can print expansion parts and such. It's gotten a lot better than it used to be. So if anyone's interested in that, it's a hobby that's not hard to get into now, and it's surprisingly entertaining.
yeah, considering like a decade ago, it was like $500,000 for a 3D printer, and now you can get the same kind of like the ones that have the resin where it rises out of it. Those ones are only a few $1,000s, and those can be very, very accurate and even be used for rapid prototyping as we use them ourselves. So a few $100s gets your foot in the door. You can make some replacement parts for things here and there around your house. But in general, the process of 3D modeling and all that stuff has become much more accessible. So if you're thinking of adding any sort of printer to your home, it's especially like I think of it like the modern day Lego. Hey, now we have a Lego machine that can make any kind of Lego that you want. So the kind of engineers and minds that we can raise and foster are quite exciting.
I just pinned
The
the
3D
3D knitting
pipelines
machine
are
on
also,
top if
sorry, go on,
anyone is
Cheryl.
interested. No, I just pinned the 3D knitting machine on top of the room.
Hell
So
Excellent.
yeah, thank you, thank you.
so I'd like
The
to give a
3D pipelines have gotten a lot more well established than they used to be. They used to be very hard to work with, and they required a certain degree of expertise because things would just go wrong everywhere. At something that being able to say 3D printing it just works is a very real accomplishment considering about where the space was a decade ago. So if folks were kind of a little intimidated by it in the past, I'd strongly recommend looking into it again now. Just even having one available and having that knowledge, it's something that changes how you look at things that are around you. Right now, they're still somewhat limited on the materials they can use, but that's growing very quickly, and the general concept of having community manufactories is becoming a lot more well supported. You're going to see versions that start hitting manufacturing policy for governments in the near future when they start actually considering the long term implications of having manufacturing capacity as a form for national security. That's going to get very interesting conversation in the coming years. Anyways, fun stuff.
Yeah, that's actually a great point. Linus Tech Tips famously had a bunch of 3D printers set up at the beginning of the pandemic to 3D print parts for frontline workers. So that's just an example of what is possible when you have this kind of technology. So imagine just being like, hey, I want to 3D print my own mask. Well, you can do that. There's masks online. Like Italy famously had that shortage of masks. So they took the snorkeling masks, 3D printed an adapter, and they were able to use normal filtration canisters on a snorkeling mask, which is awesome. So it really does change the way you look at the world. It's no longer like, hey, my remote for my TV is out of batteries. Might as well throw away the TV and get a new TV because I don't want to replace the batteries. How often do we do that with simple components that are mass manufactured, where replacing that simple component is just a matter of some imagination and perhaps a 3D printer? So
There's one
Yeah,
more
yeah.
thing to
we
add on
have
to
one
this.
of our.
That's only sorry. I'll turn it over because I've been hogging the mic. I'll just one last point. There's many other components to manufacturing than just additive 3D printing. You're looking at anywhere from about 2 dozen different processes, and it's only a small number of those have been fully automated. The reason why that's important is to consider 3D printing not as the end all be all of everything in the world 3D printed. Think of it like an introduction to manufacturing, where it's establishing an ecosystem, a business model, pipelines, etc., for a larger rethink of how we do factory manufacturing. And that's where it gets really interesting is the process and how that can change how we create things. And that's the real benefit for the long term. All right, sorry, turning over to you, Sharon.
And that dress looks amazing, Cheryl, in that photo. If that's what's made with that machine, that's amazing.
Yeah, we
See,
have a
this quick.
student that created some artificial limbs with 3D printing here at Northeastern University. And she's incorporating, now that she's created it, she's incorporating some artificial language into it so that her hope is that amputees can begin to feel like others. It's a great project. She's gotten some accolades for it. But this idea of 3D printing, I do agree, it disrupts manufacturing as we know it and decreases time to production, which I'm excited about.
So a quick
I
plug for a not open source but delightful to use pipeline. If you've got an iPad, I'd recommend trying Shaper 3D, SHAPR 3D. It's just delightful software. It's not for organic shapes, but it's more for mechanical things. It's based on the Siemens Parasolid engine. It's expensive, $200 a year or something, but you can try it for free and do 3 models for free. If you get on with that and you like making those sort of things, then go get yourself some slicing software and pretend you're going to 3D print it. The best is Simplify 3D. But it's expensive again, but it's nice to use, or just use any of the others. They all work, as Chris says. And then there's a whole range of printers out there. I've been through dozens. The only ones that worked in such a way that I nearly started a 3D printer company a year and a half ago because I was so pissed off with 3D printers. I thought you should put the filament in like a cartridge, hit a button, and it just works. The closest I've got to that is Dremel, which I think is a UK company. Again, it's more expensive because it's proprietary filament and it's in a cartridge, but again, it just works. So that's been my experience. Simplify 3D to Shaper 3D on the iPad only, and no, on everything now. Shaper 3D to Simplify 3D to a Dremel, but there's millions of other options with printers and 3D modeling software out there. So that's just been my experience. And nearly every week I 3D print something rather than throw something away. 3D print a component to fix something rather than throwing something away, typically saving hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars in the process. So it's a great experience if you're at all into that sort of stuff. But don't put up with it being shit. If it's shit, you just change your pipeline and you can get it, as Chris says, delightful. So good luck.
Okay. So on the 3D printing front, the Cheryl's Uniqlo 3D knit, I've seen the opposite of this. H&M has made a recycler, a clothing recycler, where you throw in old clothes and out the other end comes um, materials ready for turning into I don't know what the word is.
Raw materials,
Yeah, the raw
back
materials.
into raw materials.
Yeah, back in. So anyway, and it's a partnership with an outfit out of Hong Kong, and I got to visit that firsthand. That was very cool. Speaking of that, there's somebody shared. There's a whole bunch of good headlines actually. BB found this one from South China Morning Post about the gene editing baby scientist has been freed from jail in China. He Jiankui announced the birth of 3 children whose genes had been modified with the goal of protecting them from HIV in 2018, and now he's been released from jail, is the headline. I happen to have been at the event live in the audience when he made that announcement at Hong Kong University.
Wow.
And I was perhaps the least significant person in the room at that event, by the way. That was the second International Summit on Human Genome Editing at Hong Kong University. I was doing my monthly events at Hong Kong's stock exchange, HKEX, which is the most prestigious event in Hong Kong, or venue, I should say, right there next to the IFC Mall. And that was going on the day after my event. So I spent the night after my event. The next morning, I have to spend the night because my event's at night anyways. My event ends like 10 p.m. And the next morning was this event. And my flight was later that day. So I went over to HKU to watch this, not knowing that this guy was going to make one of the biggest announcements ever. And again, I was one of the least important people in the room on the topic of human genome editing, although that's a real interest, an area that I find very interesting. One of the co-creators of CRISPR were in the audience, and it was known that she was in the audience. And so when this guy jumps on stage at the podium, nobody knew what he was going to say. And I really believe that because the reaction from the audience was such a tremendous kind of collective gasp, and quite unsettling. And I remember the lady who's one of the co-founders of CRISPR was really taken aback. And my instinct after watching these, these geneticists' reaction to this guy, was to follow him out of the room. But I didn't want to put myself in jeopardy or cause any kind of problems. I don't know. Something came over me and said, nah, maybe, I think it's having lived in Thailand, you kind of learn to just let things be. So I just let him rather than do what I would have done as a younger self and follow him out of the room just to see what happens next. Because I thought for sure he was going to get arrested by the time he left the room. And apparently that did happen. He did get arrested. And China, the next day after that, I did spend the night there again that night. The next morning, I woke up to the paper under my door in my hotel room says, China bans genetic engineering. And I believe that was South China Morning Post. So that would have been like November 30th, I think was the next day. And
Pretty swift reaction there.
yeah, crazy big, fast reaction.
And
And
what's really interesting now, Tyler, is that his release from prison is triggering recriminations about why his co-collaborators in that study suffered no consequences.
well, I think it's because, and a lot of people surmised, as did I, that he wasn't really jailed at all. And in fact, that China's incredibly excited that he's done this and would love to, uh, make whatever advancements possible in this space. And so the question is, well, why would he do it? Well, perhaps he made that risk assessment and knowing that the state would find what he's doing of intense value, and that he essentially has some interesting leverage. Like, I have to imagine that that's really what happened in the back end, in the back room, was he was put into a lab and they've been working incredibly diligently, and he's probably very respected by the state and everything else. I just have to imagine that. But anyway, it's pure conjecture on my part. But
This
yeah,
crosses heavily into the field of eugenics, and I should note that our historians and our histories are extremely poorly compromised on this, where we've very much airbrushed through a lot of it. This was something that was near ubiquitous in almost every country on Earth in, around 1810 and so, 1910 through 1930. Many of foundations that are currently still operating in philanthropy, etc., were very prominent funders of many of these things that are tantamount to essentially the early stages of genocide in many countries. Most of our histories on this are very, very poorly documented. For people that want to learn more about this history, Edwin Black, War Against the Weak, is a really good thing. But the reason why this is very relevant is that because many of these questions about genetic engineering, whether or not you do it so via macromet level or whether you're doing it via chemical level or genetic engineering techniques that are more advanced with CRISPR and such, the core ethical foundations and questions still remain. And it's very instructive to learn from history about what that is, but you have to dig a little bit deeper for that. So it's something that's going to become more prominent as we start going more into these technologies.
So my thoughts on it are, scientists, I think the issues I have with his research, right, is that the children were not, or the embryos were not at risk of contracting HIV, yet he did this, right? That aside, though, the fact that he was able to knock out a specific gene in this way is significant, and that makes a lot of progressional headways into how CRISPR-9 could be used. So I do agree with you, Tyler. I think that, yeah, surface wise, front facing, China has to provide some condemnation around what he did because the research was not properly done. It wasn't over, there was a lot of oversights that were not neglected, and it wasn't approved. But on the back end, you have to consider just how far ahead will we be if we take some of these primary germline cells and then rapidly innovate these ideas into genetic editing technology. Could we potentially win the race in that arena as well? That's a huge add value. I'm talking about sort of tying it into their technological vision, as well as being the front and center for such technologies for the global community.
okay.
Transhumanism has its
That's
roots with
actually playing with
Osborne.
Mother
After,
Nature, though. I
just real
mean,
quick,
there's a reason why maladaptive phenotypes do not reproduce as poorly, because that's how evolution works. And so, it's really doing something deep. It's interfering with Mother Nature.
Frank Osborne was one of the main popularizers of eugenics after World War II when it got a bad name from the Nazis and such. It was rebranded as transhumanism, and many of the work that went into World Population Councils, etc., continued that after World War II. It never really went away. It more changed names into things like marriage counseling, etc. The reason why this is important is that many prominent things here in tech and ideas we build off of, the idea of augmenting human capabilities, etc., were based on a later variation of something called positive eugenics, saying, well, marching people off to lethal chambers is socially disadvantageous, was the language they would use. But if you use positive eugenics, then maybe you can use economics and you can use technological interventions and cybernetic enhancements in order to accomplish the same net effect. But it's important to recognize that there is some extreme blind spots that we have historically on this. And if we're navigating back to this territory, we really need to call it out for what it is.
Okay. Five real fast ones. Deutsche Bank on Tuesday became the first major bank on Wall Street to forecast a recession next year. Some experts are warning that the economy will take a major hit next year as the Fed struggles to combat inflation. And the economist said the Federal Reserve is no longer expected to achieve a soft landing and instead expecting a hard recession next year. You heard it here first. So the next is from Thomas Tong that a new laser drilled filter can remove microplastics from wastewater.
Ooh.
The filter is being tested in a wastewater treatment plant. And Stanford engineers invent a solar panel that generates electricity at night. Sounds like a Polish joke for some reason.
It's a variation of an older one, of an older technology that MIT had, but this one's got better performance than the other ones. It's actually long term. There's an idea called Maxwell's demon about how much heat you can have in one surface or another. Is taking advantage of the optics window that you can, space is colder outside than we have in the atmosphere. It's an interesting toy right now, but the long term implications, if we could really, really get good with this technology, are quite astounding, honestly. It allows us to escape something like the maximum amount of heat generation you can have on Earth, which becomes very important later on when we start looking at maximum populations and fusion generations and such. Where you can dump the heat becomes very important, and this provides a very interesting avenue potentially for mitigating that.
Okay, next is that the US and the EU add sanctions to two of Putin's daughters and toughen penalties on Russian banks. The Biden administration, the G7, and the EU have announced severe and immediate economic sanction on Putin for his invasion, and they continue to find more and more ways to penalize Putin and friends. The next and last that I can see for now is from David Crace about a new decentralized alternative to Google Maps based on Solana called HiveMapper, which raises $18 million to build a decentralized version of Google Maps by tapping into everybody's dash cams. So now your dash cam footage can join the Hive and build a massive Google Maps alternative. And maybe you can get paid if people are.
This gets more interesting when you start having cameras galore being put for autonomous cars, and every car ends up becoming a mobile sensor platform with massive amounts of sensor collection capabilities. Teslas have the ability to collect data on their local environment and then upload them to a central repository that they use to train their models. But when you start having sensors on everything because the cost keeps dropping, that's going to be very interesting for what kind of data options exist in the near future. So you're going to see a lot more of these kinds of platforms as the sensors become more common.
Russia says that it sent $650 million bond payment in rubles, and rating agencies have said that payment in rubles on dollar bonds would put Russia in technical default. And a brand new type of hidden cell in humans was just discovered. Scientists have discovered a new cell that can transform itself in human lungs called respiratory airway secretory cells, RAS.
So, Tyler, can I talk about the bond payment on rubles for a second?
We do.
Okay. Yeah, technically it would put them in technical default. But if the holders wanted to take rubles, they could amend the bond covenants and the indenture, but they don't want to because they don't want to perceptually help out Russia.
Right.
The interesting thing is not even a question of whether they get to pay in rubles, but what the ratio will be. Because I kept looking for that in stories, and finally I found one today that said Putin wants to have the ratio set by the Russian government. See, that becomes the larger problem because normally, if you can pay off a debt with cheaper currency, you would do that. Okay, it's actually advantageous. This is where it is. Um, but the other issue is that up until now, the U.S. government has allowed the American banks, J.P. Morgan and Citibank, to facilitate the bond payments because their perception, which is also my perception, is that a Russian default actually hurts Western holders of Russian debt more than it hurts Russia. But now apparently they've changed their mind and they're not going to allow the American banks to process these payments because a lot of the Russian bonds use Citibank as the bond trustee. Um, and um, having done a number of like corporate restructurings, this isn't all that different. Um, you know, it. I would let Russia basically just you know take out as much cash, U.S. cash, euros, whatever they have, to pay for Westerners because it takes the money out of the country. For some reason, the Russians have the perception it's going to hold them in good stead in the international bond market, so it's in their interest. And if I was actually running Russia, I would tell you that strategically they should default. They should default and try to preserve as much liquidity as possible, given their situation. Okay, that would be the intelligent thing to do from the Russian point of view. From the Western point of view, you actually probably should hope that they pay them, but everyone has a very jaundiced view of what their best interest is right now. So, and if I just go back and I touch on the Deutsche Bank thing, I mean they're not the only ones. I don't know if they were the first, maybe formally. A lot of people have been thinking you can't engineer a soft landing when you have a situation, you have a tight labor market and negative real rates and everything, and the Fed trying to raise rates, but because they perceive inflation. Anytime that's happened in the past, they've never been able to navigate to a soft landing. So that's not an exactly outlandish opinion. That's like that. That's pretty much history. And I'm done speaking. Thanks.
Very briefly, 1917 repudiation of debts was a very important event in Russian history for the Bolsheviks. Uh, Historically, when a sovereign state takes out bonds and they fail to pay them, or something goes wrong on the debt payments and such, it normally results in that country being invaded. It's actually somewhat shocking when you go through history about how much you can predict which country gets invaded at what times just by looking at the debt payments. One random piece of history that a lot of people don't know about is in the American Civil War. This was a major factor that actually led to the South and the North actually having their splits. There was a thing about whether or not they could pay in dollars, pounds sterling, or species with like gold or silver. And the ability to say, oh, well, you're using this one, not that one, for certain states caused other ones to get very, very unhappy. There was actually a very brief thing during John Adams actually is on record for calling for saying, yeah, if Mississippi can't pay its debts because three-fourths of the banks have just gone under, we should just let Britain invade them because if they can't take it with their thing, then their creditors should just take the state. We don't cover this part in Civil War narrative because it kind of messes with the slavery narrative with things, and you find out the British that funded a lot of this stuff. But that's a longer topic. But short version is when you see things happen with bond markets, with sovereign states specifically, that has very real historical ramifications for who gets invaded and why.
Yeah, but Chris, in the modern world, I don't think that really happens anymore. There's the Argentinian debt default, and that's pretty famous. It only happened, I don't know, in the last 2 decades, where some hedge fund they tried to restructure that debt. Most of the holders agreed to restructure. There were holdout bondholders, and a couple of really astute hedge funds said, "We're not going to do that deal," and they managed to even get some. Part of the Argentinian Navy impounded or something. So they ended up getting a better deal. But it was all done without invading Argentina. We obviously had the Brady bonds and the restructuring of Latin American debt. We've gotten a lot more sophisticated about this stuff. Okay, it's just that we're now in a different situation because of this war, but we have gotten vastly more sophisticated about this issue and particularly about like debt restructurings. One of the things that happened as a result of Argentina, this gets a little bit micro. Um, uh, at that point, most bond indentures allowed for holdout bondholders. So they basically said that if a majority of holders want to change the terms, maybe take a lower interest rate or cut their debt, what you're owed or whatever, they can enforce that on the minority of holders who didn't want to do that. They couldn't do that. They could not force them. Um, and so some of the newer bonds, and I don't know what the Russian bonds have this kind of collective action clause that would allow a majority of holders, if they could agree to say to do a deal to maybe cut principal or cut interest rates, to make that the case for all bondholders. Now, what there has not been tested is whether that's a violation of the Trust Indenture Act of 1939, because the Trust Indenture Act of 1939 guarantees the interest payment and the principal for each and every bondholder. So you're going to get into some interesting, legal issues, should all of this happen. Um, all I'm saying is that typically in the modern world there's ways of working this stuff out if people want to work this stuff out, but you're usually not in the middle of a war like this.
A
Yeah,
So
20-second
Ken,
response:
I,
change of
I,
government
I
is cheaper, and debt diplomacy for ports with China is a well-established modern-day version. Petrodollar as well is another thing that affects whether or not countries get invaded by whether or not they're actually
yeah,
de
I was
facto
just going to
acting on the same
say,
standard.
I was going to agree with that. Ken, the red line's no longer the bond market. The red line is the petrodollar, and countries do get invaded for messing with that. So that's why this is so interesting, because now, the countries that are messing with that petrodollar also have nukes. It's like we can't just go and invade China, and Saudi Arabia if they go ahead and make this new deal for oil for yuan, which, by the way, can be exchanged for gold. So that's why I was saying earlier that we have a certain view of the world for how it was before the invasion, but that view needs to change because everything has changed. It's no longer, the conditions aren't the same as they were prior to. They're different.
Okay, next up, and actually last, is that UFO sightings have left witnesses with radiation burns, brain damage, and perceived time suspension, according to interviews in newly released Pentagon report, which dates back to 2010. The psychological effects were compiled in a 2010 report that was recently released, or just released. They include serious ailments like burns, paralysis, pain, rashes, and amnesia. Other effects include heat, sexual encounters, and claimed ESP development, extrasensory perception. The report is part of a trove of documents related by the Pentagon's now defunct Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program, which studied UFOs, and the existence of the program was revealed by its former leader back in 2017.
Tyler, where's the music?
Yeah, I was thinking of that actually. Where is our X Files? There it is. So, to summarize, there's a new declassification, essentially, of a Pentagon program started back.
Do we lost you, Tyler?
Did we?
Tyler,
Are
Am
you
I here?
taken by the UFOs?
I'm
yes,
here. I'm
Yeah, we
here.
lost you like for five
Adapted,
seconds.
Oh,
adapted.
sorry. So, to summarize, this is what's here. There's more than meets the eye here, because this newly just released report from the Pentagon, which was trying to document UFO encounters, what they discovered was that people who had UFO encounters had some very interesting effects, such as paralysis and serious ailments, including what they're referring to as something similar to radiation burns.
Those are the only symptoms that you can actually check extra, like, burns are things you can actually visually verify. All the other ones can be psychological.
Right. Well, the weirdest of them is internal consequences, which are even hard for the person to fake upon themselves, because people can burn themselves and do all kinds of crazy shit to themselves externally. It's a little harder to do that shit internally.
Sounds like some people have some fancy propulsion tech they aren't sharing.
People are doing some really interesting lab work. It says they include serious ailments like burns, paralysis, pains, rashes, amnesias, and sexual encounters and claimed ESP development. Anyway, there you go. Stay away from the UFOs. if you can help it. Until we
Keep it out of
meet,
reach of children.
yes, kids under 18 need parental supervision. So thank you to everybody, and we'll
I
see you.
was saying yesterday, Tyler. There's always a sex experiment. Remember when I was explaining how we need to get evidence off a few days ago off an alien spaceship and bring it to a lab per Neil deGrasse Tyson's piece. And it did say there's always a sex thing going on for some reason.
Until next time.
Thank you. Messi, are you going to start your tech news around Africa now?
Perfect timing for Messi's room. I think she is. I think she's just getting started. Tech
Nah.
News Africa.
Yep. Yep. It's pinned on
Perfect.
top of the room for whoever is interested. Please.